Hello and welcome to the 7th Scouching Report for the 2021 NHL Entry Draft. So it turns out that about 50% of my audience is within about 5 years of my date of birth. So I'm going to start this video by making all of those people feel really old. Jaromir Jagr is a 49-year-old man who is still playing professional hockey for a team that he owns. Second in all-time NHL scoring, and that is with a 3-year gap in his NHL career where he went to Russia to play for a couple of seasons, plus another season that was lockout shortened where he was pretty close to a point per game, and an entire season that was lost to a lockout just a few years prior. And the Scouching Report today is going to be profiling one of his teammates on the team that he owns that he still plays on to this day. And his name is Jiri Tichacek, and here's where I make you feel old. Jiri Tichacek was born well over a year after Jaromir Jagr left the Pittsburgh Penguins. So the fact that this guy is now a teammate of Jaromir Jagr's as a junior-aged player playing professionally is bonkers to me to start with. But enough of that, let's get right into the video. Okay, so now that we can get started, I know what you're thinking. Oh, here comes Will Scouch with another 5'8" defenseman. Ho, he's so small, this guy could never possibly work out. But honestly, with Jiri Tichacek, I do think that there is a player here that could be a very good NHL player one day if things break right. And I certainly believe that he has many traits that are on the right track to overcoming his size deficiency. And just looking at his data set as a whole, he sat 12th in the rate of dangerous shot attempts he faced against, and that is as a defenseman. And again, this is a guy playing professional level hockey for the vast majority of this season. And in my very rudimentary expected goals model, he sat 11th with 66%. And the biggest thing when I'm looking at defenders who are smaller is that you absolutely need to be an elite skater in multiple different scenarios and in multiple different directions and in multiple different areas of the ice. But if I'm being perfectly honest, I'm not really sure, at least when it comes to pivoting and agility and quickness on his feet, that there are any defensemen outside of the first round that are as mobile and projectably positive skaters as Jiri Tichacek is. When you look at his dangerous shot attempt rate against, you might think, well, he must just have been carried by a bigger, nastier, meaner defenseman in the Czech Pro League, but that also doesn't really seem to be the case. Of all defensemen I have tracked a decent sample of, Tichacek sat 3rd in total defensive transitions where he gets himself involved. And on those transitions, he prevented control on 2/3 of them. So this is a player that when he is involved defensively, he's preventing control on a tremendous amount of defensive entries. What I didn't really expect was that when the puck was on his stick, you might think this guy's an offensive-leaning, mobile, puck-rushing defenseman, but it seemed like this was arbitrarily removed from his game this season. In terms of total offensive transitions where Tichacek is involved, he fell all the way to 22nd of 32 defensemen I've tracked a decent sample of this season. But when I look at his lack of real offensive transition involvement, but relative to his skill set, it really resonates with a report that I did 2 years ago on a player just recently signed by the New York Rangers in Zach Jones. This was a player who could really skate, really move the puck, have some real solid skill, but he just didn't bring it out very often, and his offensive controlled zone transition percentage was below 50%. And for Tichacek, it wasn't all that much better, but it was better. But a positive is that across all 7 games that I tracked, Tichacek never was worse than a 45% defensive controlled zone transition percentage, which for a 5'8" or 5'9" on a good day defenseman is certainly something I didn't expect. And while in those defensive scenarios, he seemed to get a little bit more passive over the course of the season, as he started my sample hovering around 30 to 45% involvement in defensive transitions, which is humongous, and settling down more around the 20 to 25% range down the stretch of the season, which is still good, but certainly lower than what he was registering earlier in the year. He still came across as an extremely active defensive rush defenseman, both at the offensive blue line and the defensive blue line. So to me, there's not a ton of evidence that Tichacek was just carried by a better defensive partner and not doing much else around the ice. He was involved defensively and he was shutting down control a lot. But I also can't deny that he is a 5'8" defenseman, and there are deficiencies that are blatantly there with him. He is a physical liability. There are issues with him in terms of physical imposition and separating players from pucks. But when it comes to the areas of defending that I think are being explored more and more over time when it comes to stick checking and gap management, and in these areas of the game at his best is where I felt Tichacek was tremendous, and where a lot of these really positive defensive results came from. Across the 7 games I tracked, I found only one really egregiously poor example when it comes to gap control at high pace, and biting far too early on a forechecker and just getting left completely behind at a defensive blue line scenario, which is not what you want, but when looking at his entire sample, the general trend was really positive. He just felt excellent at being able to avoid the physical part in the first place by using his quickness and his quick stick ability. He anticipates passing and rushing lanes extremely well in the neutral zone to just get in the way and block those breakouts constantly. And with that quickness and skill that he brings with his stick, he can evade pressure and open up ice and at least look for partners to move the puck to. And I know, I'm sure you already have his elite prospects page pulled up and seeing that he didn't play every single game for his team this year and he only scored 2 points over the course of the entire season. And yes, we'll get to that, and there are some issues there. But the offensive ability and the offensive instincts that he clearly shows at the junior level in the Czech Republic to this point really came out in really strong flashes at the Czech second division this year. And with the skills that he has, I certainly think that with more experience and confidence playing at this level and even higher down the road, that the offensive ability should be able to come out more and more as long as you're willing to be patient and coach him to be more aggressive. At the offensive blue line, his mobility and quickness allow him to chase down puck retrievals, prevent pucks from entering the neutral zone in the first place and maintaining possession in the offensive zone, which can be a very, very valuable trait. And he also showed an ability to lead on defenders around the ice and misdirect them and just quickly make a quick turn to his right and fire a pass to a player that even I wouldn't have seen. And he shows an ability to lead defenders around the ice and misdirect the neutral zone really, really well, make a quick turn slightly to his right and find a passing option that the opponent wasn't even tracking. So there are flashes of excellent puck management and puck movement through the neutral zone with Tichacek. And I keep falling back on the word mobility, but I just really can't help it. When I look at defenders, mobility is the tool that unlocks the most potential in my opinion. It just gives Tichacek such a diverse potential skill set. He can support partners on defensive rushes and move laterally extremely well to open and close gaps. And if his partner is defensively involved, he's quick enough and skilled enough to get involved, pull that puck away from the puck battle, open up new ice and new passing lanes, and just get the puck out of danger. And to me, that is a very important part of actually playing defense. It's one thing to separate the puck from your opponent, but then what do you do? And I think the then what do you do part is what Tichacek does extremely well, especially when it comes to physical intensity. His stick play is very good, but turning the play around and moving pucks offensively is where I think there's more work that could be done, and it's already at a pretty solid level. It just doesn't come out enough. And speaking of which, I will say that for an undersized potential puck-moving defenseman, his puck decisions and ability to read the ice were a bit sloppy at times and at least inconsistent, and that is largely what led to his underwhelming pass percentage. But when he was dialed in, his decisions were quick, they were effective, they were sneaky at times and highly creative, and he wasn't a player who I found admired a lot of his passes through the neutral zone and continuously stayed involved in play, tracking opponents and just focusing on staying in the game. Now, where Tichacek does have a bit of an issue when it comes to his skating is generating speed in a straight line. I did catch him a few times falling a step behind a forechecker and having trouble catching up to a player who's a bit bigger than he is. However, that does not mean that he gives up on the play. He might not be the first player to retrieve a puck in the defensive zone if he does fall a step behind, but he's gonna get involved and at least try to free up that loose puck. And I find that with small, hyper-mobile defenders, another advantage that I don't feel is explored a whole lot at the NHL level is the body positioning advantage that can give you. Tichacek is a really sneaky player when it comes to managing his positioning on opponents. He's certainly not the strongest hockey player I've ever seen, but he's quick enough to at least try to gain body positioning advantage and get to loose pucks that are tied up along the boards. But overall, from the defensive perspective of the game, Tichacek is a player who just gets in the way really, really well. He manages to avoid the need to be physically involved a lot through his quickness and positioning and ability to evade pressure and use his skill to open up ice. And while his stick is short, his arms are short, his body is short, and basically everything about him is relatively small at this point in time, he still manages to use those things to his advantage, which is something that I am looking for out of smaller players. And the advantages largely come from quickness, and I think a lot can be done with that trademark quickness going in both directions of play. So what's the best part of Jiri Tichacek's game? And honestly, I have trouble finding a player who is a quicker and more mobile defender, especially outside of the first round in this year's draft. And I'd argue that for small defenders to be successful in the NHL, the thing that they need to get over that hump is mobility. and Tichacek to me is one of those small defenders with a lot of mobility. When it comes to defending rushes, his mobility lends itself to really being able to cut off rushing lanes, cut off passing lanes, and get himself in the way of play very effectively. And if he doesn't want to put himself too far out of position, his ability to manage gaps and choose the right time to strike at times was very, very positive. His quickness also allows him to adapt to quick changes in play, and moving forward, he might be able to jump into more offensive rushes and play a bit more of an aggressive role with that skill and quickness. And there were signs of being able to escape pressure very well in defensive scenarios, even if he might have been a little bit overwhelmed with the physical pressure from the larger and more experienced veterans in his league. But the signs are still there, and the mobility is really something to note with Tichacek that was coming out a lot when I saw him play. The good part of Tichacek's game is his stick checking ability and his gap management. On defensive rushes, it came out a lot more than him getting beat wide like you might think smaller defenders would. Especially for a player whose historical profile seems to lean much more heavily in the offensive direction, it seems like Kladno wants to make him into a more useful all-around defender and using his offensive tools in a more defensive way, which to me sounds perfectly fine. At times this was inconsistent, and Tichacek certainly does have a lack of physical ability that really would be able to bail him out if that stick checking ability fails him on a defensive rush. But Tichacek was often playing on the offside, but his ability on his offside to sweep pucks off of puck carriers, push them into the boards, try to turn play around from there, and just stop offenses in their tracks was really, really notable. And with more experience and more time to develop his fundamentals, I really think that as long as this doesn't get any worse, he should be able to become a more dynamic all-around defender. Now for the not-so-good part, and I can't lie. We're talking about a 5'8" defender here. There are literally going to be shortcomings. So you might point to his size and rightfully say that he will be at a physical disadvantage at higher levels. It is true. He will. But to me, you have to frame things the right way. You're not drafting Jiri Tichacek to be a big, nasty physical defenseman. That's just not his game. But also, his fundamental defensive ability appears better on paper than I expected. And again, this is not a player playing in the junior levels. So I would say that yes, he can lose physical battles here and there, and yes, he can get rubbed out along the boards and lose possession of pucks deep in the defensive zone, which is not something you want super often. But I also do want to highlight something that is a legitimate concern of mine based on the profile that I'm outlining here, and that is his passing decisions. His vision with his passing was at best inconsistent, and there were some moments where you're just scratching your head wondering what he's doing outside of panicking and just getting the puck off his stick as quickly as possible. There would be signs where he could use his skill and agility with confidence to skate into open ice or open new lanes and skate into that ice and move pucks offensively with control more often than he did, but he would end up skating himself into too much pressure, looking a little bit lost with the puck on his stick, skating into no man's land and turning the puck over way too easily. And I cannot argue that it is troubling that the 10th most common passer of any player I've tracked this year sits 53rd in pass percentage. But also this is a player who is a skilled, mobile defenseman who turns the puck over on offensive transitions about 50% of the time. But I'm hopeful that this is more of an adjustment to the men's league level with relatively inconsistent minute workloads, and Kladno trying to get him to play a more defensively responsible game without taking too many risks offensively, and it might just be messing with him a little bit. But I also do think that this is something that is going to need to measurably improve over the next little while. But yeah, another not so good part is playing physically is not Jiri Tichacek's forte as we see in this clip, especially on defensive rushes if that stick checking and gap management ability fails him. Okay, so now to wrap things up. Jiri Tichacek is a project. That is undeniable. There is a chance that he never plays in the NHL, but I think that he's a decent bet, especially if he slips in the draft way further than he should go. All things being considered, I don't think I can legitimately argue that he is a top 40 player in the draft this year, but I do have him ranked in the top 40, and I certainly don't see him falling much further than 40. And a big part of that is you're drafting him out of Europe, and you're going to get multiple years where you retain his rights. You can be patient, let him develop. Kladno is a very, very good program. They were very good in the Czech second division this year, and clearly they're owned by someone who has a solid head on his shoulders because it's Jaromír Jágr, and I'm sure there are intangible positives that Tichacek is being exposed to and will continue to be exposed to as long as Jaromír Jágr remains involved in his career. And with more experience at the men's league level, slowly starting to give him more responsibility, especially moving in the offensive direction and allowing him to build more confidence, I really think that there could be a very interesting hockey player here. And I don't speak Czech, but I found an interview with Jiri Tichacek after he won Player of the Month in the junior leagues a few years ago, and he compared himself to Marek Zidličky, I think. And I don't know how many of you remember Marek Zidličky, but he was a 5'10" defender who had an offensive streak to his game that was a lot of fun to watch and was drafted way too late in the draft. So I do kind of see some parallels there. And again, I fall back on the data with Tichacek. Yes, he's small, but he skates extremely well, and his defensive results were very, very good. And say what you will about the quality of play in the Czech second division, in my experience, there is a difference between playing junior level hockey and men's league hockey almost regardless of your location, with a few exceptions. And the flashes of offensive upside with Tichacek when it comes to both getting shot attempts and creating offense in the offensive zone, I think there's a lot to like with him as a project for the next few years. I can't recall seeing him playing on the power play for Kladno this year, so when you look at the differences between Tichacek scoring in the junior leagues this season and prior years and scoring at the men's league this year, I think there's a lot of headroom for his development in the near future. But I obviously will admit that the physical side of the game is an issue with Tichacek, and it probably will be moving forward. And at times he can be too soft on his gap control, to the point of being unable to reach opponents with his stick due to his size. So if his gap management continues to improve, that hopefully goes away. But that was another thing that I caught a few times in my tracking experience. With the puck, he can skate himself into pressure, skate himself into a wall, and just cause too many turnovers, which to me is not really going to be an option for him moving forward. He's going to need to learn how to become not only just an elite skater or an elite skilled defenseman, but he's going to need to be an elite problem solver and an elite identifier of open space, passing lanes, and have great vision for his line mates and execute on passing decisions quickly. Without it, I don't think there's going to be a tremendous potential for success. But there are signs abound that this is a player that could be a dynamic, offensive-leaning defenseman that is perfectly competent defensively, or at least not a total liability defensively. And plus, he's just a ton of fun to watch. And I like players that are a ton of fun to watch. And on plays like the one I'm highlighting here, if he can gain an extra gear skating in a straight line and generating power, and showing more of an ability to drive opponents wide in their defensive zone, and attacking down the wing more often than he did, it could make Tichacek a dangerous playmaking defenseman as well off of the boards. And a lot of people assume that I just really, really like all smaller hockey players, but I watch a lot of hockey. I understand that there are limitations with small hockey players, and it is harder for them to make it work in the NHL with how physical and fast it can be. But if Tichacek weren't really quick and mobile in a variety of ways in multiple areas of the ice, if he weren't as skilled as he is, or if he wasn't as demonstrably successful defensively playing against grown men in the Czech Republic as he is, then he wouldn't be ranked on my list, let alone as high as he is. But I have a really good feeling about this guy, and I think if someone chooses to believe in him and push him to be as good as he possibly can be in both directions of the game, there could be an interesting player here. He's gonna need to be an elite skater, he's gonna need to be an extremely good, if not elite passer, and at the very least, he's going to need to be a competent defender. So focusing on reading the ice a little bit more effectively, spotting line mates in open ice and executing on those passing options and being accurate with his passes more often, while still maintaining his trademark agility, some solid deception skill that came out once in a while, and just getting more comfortable with more experience at high levels of hockey, should make him a more capable defender moving in the offensive direction. So Tichacek is a guy that I have not seen ranked on any lists really, let alone in the range that I have him ranked. But I am always a fan of betting on mobile defenders regardless of their size, especially when their mobility is at as high a level as this player. Guys like Dominic Fensori, even a David Ference are guys that I have really liked in the past that are small but extremely mobile on the ice with a real good side order of skill. And the benefit with Tichacek is that he is a small defenseman who is not getting completely caved in defensively. And relative to guys like Fensori and Ference or Zach Jones, he's not playing against junior level competition. He's performing very well defensively against men. I know, I keep saying it over and over again, but it bears repeating. In my track data, he currently sits 23rd in dangerous shot attempt percentage, and having the 12th lowest rate of dangerous shot attempts against for a defenseman is very notable. And the potential with a defenseman who can skate and move the puck on his stick like Tichacek can and did when he was playing really, really well is something that I think is worth betting on in this year's draft, and you let him develop in the Czech Republic for a few years with not that many expectations, and I think you could potentially end up with a steal in this year's draft. So that's it for this Scouching Report. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, you can click all the buttons you see below me so you never miss another one. If you really liked it, you could subscribe on Patreon or here on YouTube by clicking join below. You'll get early access to videos, a Discord server, data sheets for hundreds of drafted and undrafted prospects, merchandise discounts, and plenty of other goodies. Or you can pick up some merchandise from the Scouchwear shop, where 50% of profits go to the Women's Sports Foundation. So that's all, and we'll see you in the next one.